Alrighty guys, so this video is over adding and subtracting polynomials. So let's get started. Here you see three different examples. We're going to go through these three and we're going to talk about how we combine like terms. Now you guys have already practiced combining like terms. So for example, if I write the problem 5x plus 3x, we know that because both terms have an x, they're like terms. They're raised to the same exponent. That's a 1. So what do? We simply add the coefficients, the 5 and the 3, to get 8, and we keep the x the same. Notice we did not get 8x squared. We're not adding exponents, okay? We're simply combining like terms because the variable and the exponent are the same. Now, if we were multiplying x times x, remember that's when we get x squared. But when we are adding or subtracting terms in a polynomial, we do not change the exponent. So let's look at these three examples. My first term is a 12p cubed, third power, we call that cubed, plus 11p squared plus 8p cubed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to look for all of my like terms. So 12p to the third and 8p to the third are like terms. They're both p's raised to the third power. That is not a like term with the 11p squared. It's still a p, but the exponent is a 2. Because the exponent is a 2, it's a completely different term. It's not a like term. So I combine the coefficients. I add 12 plus 8 to get 20, and I keep the p cubed exactly as is. Now the 11p squared term is going to just be written after. This is your final answer. You do not combine that for 31p to the 5th. They're not like terms. They are not added together. It's like adding an apple to an orange and combining those and telling me how many apples you have. They're two different things. Okay, let's look at the next example. I have 5x squared. That is my largest exponent, 2. That's what you always start with, is the term with the largest exponent, because we want to write our answers going from biggest exponent to smallest exponent. So the 5x squared doesn't have any other x squareds to combine with. So in fact, it just gets written alone. Now after an x squared, what is the term that would come after that? What variable, one less exponent? So instead of having an exponent of 2, we would look for an exponent of 1. Well, in fact, we have this x right here. What's in front of it? That subtraction sign, the minus. The negative 3x has nothing to combine with, so we write it next. Now, lastly, after an x to the first power, there's no other x that I would have, so I'm now looking for my constant. Remember, a constant is a value that does not change, so it's not going to have a variable attached to it. So when I'm looking for my constants, I see a negative 6 and a positive 8. When I combine those two things together, I get positive 2. Now this result right here, this is called a trinomial. There are 3 terms in this. This is the first term, this is the second term, this is the third term. So this is called a trinomial, okay? Specifically, this trinomial, the highest exponent is a 2, okay? When the highest exponent is a 2, we call that a quadratic. Quadratic trinomial is the name, the specific name for this polynomial answer. To throw some more vocab at you, this answer is written in what we call standard form. Standard form means that you write your answer from largest exponent going down to smallest exponent, okay? And then another vocab word to throw at you is leading coefficient. We know what coefficient means. It's the number being multiplied by the variable. The leading coefficient is simply what is the coefficient that begins your polynomial when written in standard form. So in this trinomial, the leading coefficient is the 5. It's the coefficient of our largest exponent term. Okay, a lot of vocab word for you. We'll keep using those and you'll get better at them. Let's look at this next example. Let's just see what we have. We have a t squared, an s squared, a t squared, and s squared. So I'm going to be able to combine some like terms. I look for my largest exponent, which is squared. I have this t squared and this, negative 4t squared. So when I combine those, remember in front of this t squared would be a 1. So I have 1t squared minus 4t squared. That gives me negative 3t squared. Now I look at my s's, my s squared. I have 2s squared minus how many s squareds? 1. That gives me 1s squared. Now, do we need that 1 there? No, we don't. So I could just write plus s squared. Okay? Now, they both have an exponent of 2, so they're the same degree. So it didn't matter which one really came first. You could write s squared minus 3t squared if you want. Since they're the same degree, doesn't matter which one comes first. Now, let's talk about some of our vocab words. The highest exponent is a 2. So we would call this quadratic. And the highest exponent is a 2. It is a quadratic. Now, how many terms are there in this answer? Here's one term. Here's a second term. When there are 2 terms, we call this a binomial. Think about a bicycle, 2 wheels. So when there's 2 terms, it's a binomial. Going back to our second example, there were 3 terms, tricycle, 3 wheels, trinomial. Okay? The leading coefficient in our answer was a negative 3. Okay, let's move on. Here, this one looks a little bit complicated. I can do it. So I look for my biggest exponent. My biggest exponent I see, I've got an x squared. What else can that 6x squared combine with? Well, it could combine with that 3x squared. It can also combine with this negative 8x squared. Let's combine all those together. 6x squared plus 3x squared, 9x squared, minus 8x squared just gives me 1x squared, or x squared. Now I would look for anything that also has a squared, like do I have any y squareds? Nope. So now I look for just any x's or any y's. That would be the next degree with an exponent of 1. I see that I have this negative 4y could combine with this positive 3y. That gives me negative 1y. And then minus 2y gives me negative 3y. There's my answer. Now let's name this. It's written in standard form because I have my largest exponent going first. How many terms are there? 2. So this is a binomial. What's the largest exponent? A 2. So what do we call that? Quadratic. This is a quadratic binomial with leading coefficient of what? Leading coefficient of 1. The number in front of this x squared. All right. Next one, I've got this gigantic polynomial with how many terms? It's got 1, 2, 3, 4 terms in it. Adding to this thing with 2 terms, so that's adding to a binomial. Let's combine all that together. So again, start with your largest exponent. I've got 5a cubed plus, I'm scanning the problem for any other a cubes. There's another one. 5a cubed plus 7a cubed. That gives us 12a cubed. So I'm done with those. Now I would look for any a squareds, okay? I've got 3a squared plus 12a squared. That gives me 15a squared. Done with those. Now I look for any a's. I have a negative 6a with a negative 10a. That gives me negative 16a. Remember, we're not changing our exponents. We're combining like terms. Now let's name this thing. How many terms are there? 1, 2, 3. Instead of a binomial, this is a trinomial. What's the largest exponent? 3. Remember what we call a 3? This is a cubic. 2 is quadratic. 3 is cubic. What's the leading coefficient? 12. You got it. Written in standard form, largest exponent to smallest. Okay, moving on. Ooh, subtraction. Yes, we love subtraction because we know that this minus sign coming in front of a gigantic set of parentheses has to be what, guys? Remember, we could write this as a negative 1. What do you think we're going to have to do to that negative 1? I know you all know this. Distribute it, yeah, to just the x squared? No. Negative 1 has to be distributed to the x. It also has to be distributed to the 1. It has to be distributed to everything that follows in the next set of parentheses. Every single term that follows in the next parentheses. This this polynomial in the front, specifically it's a trinomial because there's 3 terms, is not affected by that distributive property. So I would write it exactly as it appears. Now I'm going to distribute my negative and see what I get. A negative 1 times a positive x squared is minus x squared. Negative 1 times x is minus x. Negative 1 times 1 is minus 1. So now I've distributed. Now this is exactly like all the problems we've done in the previous examples. Start with your largest exponent, 2x squared. Look for the like terms. 2x squared minus 3x squared. That's negative 1x squared. Here's another one, a negative 1x squared. So negative 1x squared minus 1x squared is negative 2x squared. So I'm done with those 3 terms. Now I look for my x's. Here I've got a negative x, nothing to combine that with, so that goes next. What comes last? The constants. I've got a positive 1 with a negative 1. Well, 1 minus 1, that's 0. So I actually have plus 0. Now, would we ever write plus 0? No, so I wouldn't write that part. So when I name this, how many terms? 2. Binomial. What's the largest exponent? 2. What's it called? Quadratic. What's the leading coefficient? Negative 2. Look at all these vocab words you guys are learning. Okay, here's another one. Subtraction again. 2 polynomials being subtracted. I write a negative 1 and then I distribute. If I don't write in that negative 1 and maybe draw those little arches, I'm going to forget. My first binomial stays the same. It's not affected by the negative 1 that's being distributed. Negative 1 times a positive 5m to the 4th is minus 5m to the 4th. Negative 1 times negative 5m squared is positive 5m squared. Negative 1 times 8 is minus 8. Now simply combine your like terms. I'm going to do this quickly because I think you guys probably have the hang of it. 7m to the 4th minus 5m to the 4th is 2m to the 4th. That's my largest exponent. That's why I started with that one. Negative 2m squared plus 5m squared. That's plus 3m squared. Last but not least, I don't have any m's. So next would be my constant, my minus 8. Okay, this is a 3-termed trinomial. Okay, now this is a 4th degree. Okay, so what do we call something that is 4th degree? We call that a quartic. Quartic. So this is called a quartic trinomial. Kind of a hard one to remember. Well, maybe not. Quarters, 4 quarters and a dollar, quartic trinomial, leading coefficient of 2. Okay, again, if you guys will do this one, then we'll compare answers. See if you can name it as well. All right, so when you're finished, you should have gotten 8q squared minus 3q plus 5. This is a, what guys? Quadratic trinomial. And that is it for today.